We have William Maleoni, economist of the World Bank for the region of Latin America and the Caribbean. He is a world expert in innovation, productivity, and first of all, was economist in chief for finance institutions and competitiveness. On the other hand, we have with us also Dr. Irene Arias, director of IDLAB. IDLAB is the innovation lab for the Inter-American Development Bank, the main source of financing for the development of Latin America and the Caribbean. Previously, she worked in the private sector. We also have Dr. Jose Miguel Benavente, Executive Vice President of Corfo. This is the Agency of Productivity in the government of Chile. Before them, Benavente was a specialist, leader of the Division of Competitiveness. Thank you very much for being with us. And we also have with us Dr. Jose Escamilla. He is Associate Director of the Institute for the Future of Education at Tecnológico de Monterrey. He was the director at Tech Labs, Dean of the School of Graduates and Education at Tec de Monterrey. Thank you very much, all of you. And this is a space where we can talk about innovation, challenges in the Latin American region and the Caribbean to be able to make all of this innovation, education converge and for us to actually strengthen or drive the development of countries in Latin America and in the Caribbean. So, first of all, I would like for Dr. William Maloney to talk about the research that he has done recently and the urgency that there is for talking about these topics. Why is this important? Why at this time do we need to have this on our agenda? Please, over to you, William. Thank you. Thank you, Karina, and thank you everyone for being here and to the other fellow panelists as well. The book is about our problems as a region that grows very little. We're thinking about 2.5% in the last years and probably in the future as well. The book says that this is not a topic of a lost decade, but rather a matter that has been passed over from last century, where we were not able to identify and adopt and implement the new technologies of the second industrial revolution to be able to modernize our industries such as mining and taking advantage of new industries that were coming out of that revolution. That is to say, we came into that era unarmed. The relevance for today is that we continue with a lot of these same problems. We have levels of education that are very low compared to other competitive countries. We graduate very few students in the STEM fields of technology. We have companies that, uh, or business people that are somewhat below other more advanced countries, and our universities don't communicate well with the private sector. So we have a whole problem with our ecosystem on innovation and uh, entrepreneurship that hinders us from adopting the new technologies that would give us a greater drive towards growth. Doctor, I'd like to ask you a question. Why do you think that it has cost so much more work in Latin America to close this gap and to adopt these new technologies? Then I would open up for the other experts here to give their opinion on this question. Well, I'll give you an example. If we look at year 1900, Chile, Uruguay, Argentina had more or less the same level of income as Denmark and Sweden, okay? But they had a fifth of the engineers that those countries had, and they also had literacy rates that were very much below those other countries. So what happened in the century afterwards is that Sweden, Denmark, Japan, Korea, all of these countries took off and we didn't. So our initial conditions, I'm not sure exactly why we didn't have so many engineers, but it wasn't maybe our calling or I don't know. But the fact is that in the century that passed, we have not remediated that problem. We haven't addressed that issue of education and our low focus on technical aspects. Don Jose Miguel, because we have two Joses here, could you please give us your opinion? What has happened in Latin America? This problem has been diagnosed, and we have a lot of research on the topic, but we continue without being able to close this gap. And before we continue, I do remind our audience that throughout the transmission, there is a QR code that you can send your questions to because we will have interaction at the end. Okay, over to you, Don Miguel. Yes. First of all, I think that the point that Bill is mentioning is very important because generally we tend to see these issues with a much shorter scope or term, and we're not looking at the historic context of how those have been developed and how this dependency comes together. And we have certain situations in which, sure enough, this gap is growing. Secondly, I think it has to do with the interaction between the private world and the public world to move forward this type of initiative. I think that this initiative was very close to the public and private sector in the uh, 50s, but with a policy that we did not consider adequate, we tried to develop it on our own. And there are some success cases, very small at the fund because there was engineering capability. I'm thinking of and Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, but the rest of the countries were not able to do it. So we had opposite mechanisms, but we forgot how important it is to create those spaces for connection with the business knowledge developed in the world. So the policy of attracting foreign investment obviously was very important, but we were trying to see the through the foreign investment and productive in a more friendly connection, for example, with university institutions. The third element that I think is relevant here is that in many of these countries, for example, in the uh, case in this book, I think that it's also very interesting to see the position of the state more than government or the private sector, where you wanted to focus. We are now just turning back, for example, countries like Chile that have now adopted it by law. We want to decarbonize by 2050. And to decarbonize by 2050, not only is there a different public and private work, but an orientation to comply with this mission. So we understand the policy, the support of lithium, green hydrogen, etc., with a vision which is more collective. And that did exist in many of the benchmark countries that Bill was mentioning. Very good. Thank you, Dr. Irene. Could you share your remarks? Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Karina. And perhaps to add to what Bill and what I said in my publication and Jose Miguel's uh, comment, going deeper on one aspect, which is to be able to close that gap besides the main issues of education being one of them and basic infrastructure, physical and digital, there is a component which has been very delayed in Latin America and the Caribbean, that is the incentives for being able to do something that the publication mentions in the fourth chapter. It's the creation of new sectors, new companies, and creating experimental economies that could produce uh, high quality enterprises. What has been lacking, and it's improving, but it still lacks more financing to those bets on a higher risk. Uh, Venture capital is still less than 0.1% of GDP regionally, and this compared to other developing countries, which are at 0.7%, or more advanced countries, which are at 5% per capita. So this is a scarcity. Secondly, what Bill and you mentioned, Karina, as well, communication between uh, the educational aspect and then the commercialization. of that research is very low. And to begin with, investment in that research is already low. It's 0.5% of GDP. In other countries, it exceeds 5 or 6 or multiples of that. So a low investment that could then feed that innovation, which are not copies of something else, but are actually genuine innovations. And lastly, the market is very fragmented. So now some countries are taking off like innovation hubs. Mexico is the main hub for entrepreneurs to become more international. Chile has made many steps in that direction, and Brazil is a great ecosystem. But if we still compare it to other regions, it's still very fragmented. So that's just to go a little deeper on one of the aspects that uh, supports the need to invest in education infrastructure, but it makes it difficult to close that gap. And imagine that you, as an expert at BidLab, has lived this kind of problem, being able to finance and get resources. Yes, and it continues to be our purpose precisely to focus on that financing gap, developing more the innovation ecosystem and for it to be less fragmented as a system. Perfect. Thank you very much. And Doctor from academia, Mr. Jose Escamilla, help us to understand what has happened. I know that many disruptive ideas are happening within universities. Help us to understand how, from academia, we can close that gap as well. Of course, thank you very much. First of all, I want to congratulate William and his colleagues on a book, a very interesting and necessary report. And according to the participations of my colleagues, William, Irene, and Jose, I would add perspective on talent, or maybe would go in depth. Latin America is the region in the world with the greatest talent gap. I think one of the reasons that explain the problem that we're talking about here is preparation or education. Not only initial education, we have great evidence of that found in the report that international standardized tests show that Latin America is very much set behind, and there hasn't been significant progress in those tests, but also in university education, college education. Universities in Latin America don't connect properly with the needs of society, of industry, of business. There isn't a good connection. And in spite of that, the response terms or cycles that we have are very long. We're not very responsive to those needs. And in the economy of knowledge or learning, those needs are very changing. So we need to somehow change the way that universities respond to these needs of the environment in the formation of talent, which would be one element. And then we could also talk about in uh, innovation and development. I think in Latin America, there are many universities that don't do research. They just form talent, and these universities don't respond to those needs either. So we have engineers, uh, people graduating out of sciences, lawyers that aren't properly connected to these needs, and that's a severe problem as well. I understand. And on this topic, and I'd like to pick up on your last comment regarding how feasible it is in a context such as ours to be able to fund this type of projects for universities, for example, to uh, nurture research when they have limited funds. And I'd like to open up this topic on whether it is feasible to translate what we have already said in theory in on the field in a region where we already have stunted economic growth. So what could be a path to actually make this happen, but adjust to the circumstances and our realities? Please, Dr. Maloney, if you'd like to open up this round. Well, the fact is we spend a lot on education and also on our universities. I think that the incentives are not properly aligned to generate the results that we need. As Mr. Jose was saying, our PISA uh, rates are very low. The wealthiest quintile in Argentina has scores lower than the lowest scores in Vietnam. That's our competition, developing Asia, and we're not doing the effort with the resources we have to make our schools more effective. And obviously, it is possible. You can look to Brazil. I forget exactly where, but there's a region that has been very successful in increasing their PISA grades or scores effectively, and also in universities, incentives are no longer aligned for there to continue to be collaboration with the private sector. It's not a cultural or sociological aspect. It's when the Finnish people had to make a strong change in 1990, they channeled their resources differently. They made more resources available. They got the resources from someplace, but they did matching brands so that universities could find a partner with Nokia or some other large company. It was merely a matter of incentives. It was not magic or some uh, special funds. It was just making the incentives the proper ones. So I think that we could do a lot better with what we have already. Dr. Irene, because you are uh, in the area of incentives, in Latin America and the Caribbean, what success cases do we have that we could learn from on this type of successful project? Thank you, Karina. Well, kind of what Bill was saying, sometimes it's uh, international level. We have seen, obviously, the examples are in Brazil and Argentina, but also sub-region. We see obviously the role Tec de Monterrey has played to generate collaborations. We ourselves at BitLab have collaborated a lot with Tec de Monterrey to generate capabilities and also to bet on high impact entrepreneurships and to accelerate the use of artificial intelligence. It's a whole, it's I plus D plus C. And as a colleague was saying that was on a panel of the BID in Chile, innovation and development, whoever is capable of bringing together those skills with the technological layers that are enabling, they will make it much better. And that we are seeing it both at a country level, there have been success cases, but going back to the case of Brazil, that obviously has the greatest investment of the entrepreneurial capital and the level of startups and half of the unicorns is that that bet on innovation has not only come from the entrepreneurial sector or private sector and a collaboration with academia, but also from the public sector. There have been enabling factors that have allowed to not replace private innovation, but multiply it. So, for example, a central Brazilian bank, when in November 2020 they launch PEAX as an instrument for payment between citizens, it became a platform that enabled all kinds of innovations that fintechs and other companies can innovate on. And it has the success they've had. It grew almost overnight from 9 to 63 billion in transactions and penetration at 90% of adults in Brazil. So that's when lots of stars have to align, but we have to produce those successes as in Brazil. Yes, and a part of those alignments of these stars obviously go through the government sector. And Don Jose can tell us what has happened in Chile. How can you talk about these uh, enabling factors that Doña Irene was talking about, and evidently you also have a budget, but tell us about your experience from government. Yes, I think that what Bill and Irene are talking about here is key. Our policy mainly is oriented in the last 40 or 50 years in all of Latin America in strengthening the knowledge skills through excellent forming competencies and human capital, but that's an enabling factor. It's half of the story. The other half is how I link or connect to the productive world, the public world, which is demanding this type of solutions. So, what you need to do in Latin America, I'm going to make a particular case. The institution that most invests in development is not the equivalent of our agency, is the sectorial ministries and companies. Clusters, so that the scientific world and uh, companies, a topic that Irene knows very well, they are the ones that provide these solutions to the demands of the public and productive world. And universities align with that. The problem we have in our countries is precisely that we don't have those great demands from the productive world and much less in the public world. Now this is changing. We have, as Chile, going to your question, Karina, the state of Chile can do what we call, or the government of Chile can do public acquisitions, not bidding who sells a solution cheapest that I already know, but who can create a solution to a problem that I know as a government, and then who can give the best solution. It's established in many countries, starting by Spain, which is the most developed model, but we in our countries don't have. The productive world is also what we call open innovation. We need productive sectors that are capable of uh, producing something that can solve these problems, and that's also lacking because we have a productive world that's related to the first question that is used to structuring problems and looking for a third party to help, whether it be companies or universities that can serve this, or even startups oriented to strengthening this. I think, and with this I'll finish, that's what we lack, strengthening the demand side in structuring problems and challenges so that the university and scientific world can. We need to strengthen the university of scientific skills. That's half of the story. We also need to implement public policy on the side of the demand so that this can come together the way most of the countries that we want to imitate have done. Dr. Jose, I'd like to see if you can add to this. What is lacking regarding demand? We were saying that universities have a great seed or talent, but what would they need to be able to strengthen for companies to help them, for governments to help them? What would be the point? What would you need so that all of that talent that is already incubating could catalyze and close, as you say, this offset between problems that and vision had from the university to the problems in real life? I would like to focus on what we can do from universities because we already talked about public policy. And sometimes the environment is what it is, and we have to live with it. And that doesn't mean we can't do things. At the Institute for the Future of Education, we work precisely on transforming universities, but also creating and transforming lifelong learning. And we work with many universities and governments this last year, around 60 in the region. But something that happens many times in universities is we don't take a dose of our own medicine. That's an expression we have here in Mexico. We don't take a dose of our own medicine. And I think something interesting that happens at the TEC is we do make a very important effort of taking that same dose. For example, on the curricular side, students, the study plan is skill-based, and 50% of that study plan is activities that students do in companies, at industries, in governments, in civil society organizations where professors have to leave their desk and leave theory to go look for a teaching partner, these companies, so that the students can do activities, solve some challenge in those areas, and thanks to that challenge, develop certain competencies. So this makes it so that the study plan that we develop is a lot more connected to these needs. Our students are more connected, but also our academia, our professors, our faculty. This then enables other types of connections, such as working connections and activities where we make our students and our environment and community can have a more entrepreneurial spirit, this desire to uh, create enterprise. And this type of thing, I think, is important to say. We also have to look for this kind of work as infantry. Maybe it's not at a public policy level, but we do need to create more universities and models, not identical to the tech. Every context is different, but in different places in different countries. And here we have a great opportunity because as universities, we have this tendency to uh, be like the others. So if we are able to create a movement of going out to other universities to make connections with industry and with business and this speed of response, I think that by imitation or aspiration, we would be able to achieve a more bottom-up change. A while ago, Dr. Maloney was saying that at some point, I think Vietnam was the country that did an association. Finland. Okay. So on this point, I'd like to talk about what is the role that private uh, sector or initiatives play. They have to play actively, not just as a spectator and not just for their own interests, but to be able to open up and make that benefit and those resources drop down in a cascade and to be able to not just fulfill their company interests, but also to become an environment, an ecosystem. How have you seen synergy with companies? How open are they to finally create these learning economies? Dr. Maloney, perhaps? Yes, as you say, obviously the private sector is at the center of the issue. It is the organism that creates the added value. The government only enables or facilitates what the private sector does. But the topic of understanding exactly what is the roadblock that is hindering our uh, businessmen to be able to learn better, use more technologies from outside, doing more research and development, that's something that we don't understand that well. It could be, on one hand, our ecosystems aren't working that great, as Irene was saying. There could be uh, problems with normal capital, but also with venture capital, and we don't know what the best way to stimulate this sector is because uh, it's a matter of having this talent, this capability, identifying and handling high-risk enterprises. On the other hand, we have a lot of uncertainty in our economies. We have workforce, as we're seeing, 30% of companies say they can't grow because of a lack of qualified labor. So we have lots of problems. Many times it's difficult to work in our countries. So there's this whole environment, but at the same time, we need to talk about the capabilities or skills that our businessmen have in terms of managerial skills, technical skills, and this means that we have to look at the full pipeline of human talent that we have in our uh, countries and think, what does the government have to do to improve this pipeline? There's also a role where the government can help is coordinating private sector. I was in Guadalajara. Guadalajara has had HP and IBM for 50 years, a wonderful city, but what they haven't had are Mexican, purely Mexican, high technological companies. So when we talk with people, with Tec de Monterrey, with businessmen, it's not exactly obvious what's lacking, but They are thinking, and then government is helping and trying to coordinate and think what's lacking. In every city, in every country, there are different problems. We have to work together, and government can play a role of coordinator and facilitating these discussions to identify what we need. But at the end of the day, it's the private sector. In Brazil, we did great advancements in the PISA. Doctor, how do we make private initiative join and create this environment? As you were mentioning, Guadalajara, Mexico, there's a cluster of companies, but none of them has taken off. Uh, can you tell us your experience to be able to improve productivity? You need to create, you need for these companies, first of all, to have a leadership and have openness to opening channels so that innovators that are capable of taking more risk and solving problems in the same company's value chain, integrating them. So there's a lot of friction nowadays because to begin with, there is not that leadership, and companies that we've analyzed through a program that we've done at BitLab, corporate impact venturing, innovation in the companies. The majority had very little vision on how to innovate. So there is work yet to be done. And for there to be a marketplace where they connect, just as Jose Miguel Benavente was saying regarding uh, connection to the offering, it's a potential detonator of the market for many startups. Corporates also have that role to play, but they need to have that vision and they need to generate those capabilities so that it's not so difficult to be able to integrate those solutions. Having said that, the focus on how to do it, because there's an easy solution, many countries have done it, but it's a little different and it requires uh, mindset and more patient capital. So you need to even create a certain infrastructure to be able to uh, share, and that's why the agreement that we have at IDB Lab to create Startup Lab Point Zero One, or the accelerators that we've made in Antofagasta for the ecosystem, they're precisely to enable companies that have an innovation capability to reach a scale where they can integrate with the demand of the great companies that operate there. So a focus with greater capital and a type of infrastructure that's very specific, and a different focus for other types of innovation. And what you need there is perhaps to work more from the side, as we've done in Mexico City with the Institute of Social Attraction, to adopt innovations of companies that are enabling the follow-up of patients from home that need care. And now with companies, Anacare and others, you can integrate these innovations. This doesn't require such a great capital nor physical infrastructure. It's more of an application, but it does require a lot of work in the framework and the rules of the game so that the public servant isn't intimidated or afraid of working with. Uh, and that's something that also the laws of public bidding are important. And just to wrap up on your comment on how much you hit roadblocks with legislation, when you reach the countries and regions, you don't have this legal environment. So I would like for you to share what your experience has been, or if you see, if you need more legislative changes, what is your opinion, Doctor? There are still roadblocks at a national level, but also, for example, in the sector where we have innovated more, where there's been more disruption, and where we'd say this is a more mature sector, more than half of the startups, like fintech, embedded fintechs, even there, for the internationalization within the region of these startups, the fragmentation of regulation and the rules of the game country to country make it very difficult for a company to become internationalized. And that's the simplest case because it's the most developed vertical, and there's still a lot more to be done. What we are hoping, we did a study on this sector of deep technologies that there had already been 340 enterprises of this type of scale. This is a market that already represents 8 billion potential dollars of economic value, and that in itself could attract more capital and make this industry more relevant so that they can improve that environment and those conditions to scale. It's not just regulation, right? It's also enabling spaces like we were mentioning in the case of Chile. Okay, so as we are reaching the last mile of this conversation, I'd like to ask the panelists here two important questions. If in this environment of so much uncertainty, with a geopolitical problem or several on the table, and a matter of fees also where there's a lot of uncertainty, is this being an uphill, making it an uphill project to propose these Jose Miguel and then Jose Escamilla on this topic of geopolitical uncertainty? Yeah, I'd like to mention an important point that Bill Maloney's text mentions, the capability of absorbing foreign knowledge and incorporating it into your local practice precisely has to do with the exchange of goods and equipment as a source, but it's not the only one. I would say that, especially in the North American case and in some other cases, it was the people who incorporated this in themselves. They made this transfer. So I'd say in the Argentinian uh, case, for the development of manufacturing industry, automotive, and machinery and equipment. What I'm saying with all of this is that, yes, sure enough, through the agreement with this blocking or less flow of parts and components into the countries, it doesn't mean that we'll have a policy that will be more proactive to attract talent, to incorporate them within the productive processes, and in some way address one of the demands that Bill was mentioning, that our private productive system is many times not sufficiently uh, submitted to competitive pressure internationally, especially of those goods and services that are oriented to the domestic market. In the case of Startup Chile, that many of you know already, it was attracting foreign talent, where the greatest effect was the change in mentality of entrepreneurs in Chile, connecting to entrepreneurs from more sophisticated countries or economies. As the case of in history, we can see people in business administration, especially the ones of technological content, that can get involved in local capabilities so that the local world can learn from that talent and knowledge to drive an agenda, especially of new sectors. And I think that this could be an opportunity of the situation that's coming in the future. Latin America in general, being a focus of attraction, we're farther away from where problems are happening. Distance helps us. Sometimes they're more attractive for talent, especially as Bill was saying, this also has to do with who is in charge of the companies. Even though they are national or domestic capital, bringing attracting talent could be an opportunity from our current context. Thank you, Don Jose. Over to you to talk about this challenging environment. Yeah, well, I wanted to focus again on the development of entrepreneurial talent. The report mentions how companies, I think in Brazil, have uh, managers who have been educated abroad, they were more innovative than others. And when you think about this, I think you have institutions in Latin America that are very good at educating. They're excellent. And very likely a topic here is culture. What culture is acquired when you go there? And I repeat what Jose Miguel was saying of how Startup Chile has attracted foreigners and created a different culture among entrepreneurs in Chile. So, how can we create within the universities a culture of entrepreneurship? In many universities, we have courses, materials, etc., but many times they are stuck in theory. So I think that there are very easy things that can be done to break away from that fear of entrepreneurship. We had something that we called Week of Entrepreneurship here at the Tech, where we would give students around $200, $250. They'd sign an agreement with the Tech. They had to do an entrepreneurial project. They could sell lollipops or do something more sophisticated. And in teams of five, they would sign up with Hacienda, run the company, and at the end of the month, they'd have to return that money and they could close the business down. Imagine the work that this implies for a student, but the responsibility of receiving funds for the first time, signing this paperwork, going through the whole process of creating a company, handing over results, and then closing it down. That creates skills that no uh, theoretical course could give. So maybe it's a little extreme, but do we do have to look for these opportunities or spaces to be created. They tell a student you can be an entrepreneur, and they start creating this culture that you are capable of doing it once you graduate in your specialization or in any other area, creating the space for entrepreneurship. And today, in this context of such great complexity we have, we require of this entrepreneurial spirit not only to take on new enterprises, but also for those entrepreneurs, right? The ones that are working in business already, being capable of being agile to be able to respond to these needs of the environment, of our surroundings. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. Now I'd like to take a moment because we have received some questions and whoever wants to answer may feel free to, but there is a lot of concern on this topic. I'd like to begin with this. One of our people from the audience asks, with the century of setback that we have in Latin America and the Caribbean, objectively, do you think that we can recover this setback and how long would it take? And the second question, this same user says, what is the secret for Brazil to have had so much success with entrepreneurs? And what would we lack for countries like Argentina or Bolivia being able to achieve the same thing? Who would like to take that? I could answer maybe on the first topic. I'd say that the way in which we have faced this of the public policy and also from the vision of it shows that it's bringing great results. I think that the text is very clear. The book that Bill wrote, there are enabling conditions for this to happen, depending on the stage or the phase that you are in. Obviously, the institutions that work are fundamental, and we still have some countries that haven't been able to get that down pat, especially the recent situation, both internationally and locally, they make it more complex. But I would say that a second phase is also doing a sort of public policy that's different to what we have done. And Chile is maybe the best case because we have human capital and we're still innovating very little. We still invest very little on uh, R&D. So I think that we'd have to do a second turnaround, what this book shows. The first is understanding that technological change is not neutral between sectors. If we are sectors that are intensive on natural resources, any book would say this doesn't happen in the sector. It happens in the suppliers of that sector, which is different to the pharmaceutical or electronic case. So if we have industry like copper, we need to pay attention to the suppliers. Secondly, is to say, how do we link or connect those suppliers? Or the other one that we're trying to do here in Chile is looking more proactively as a state, these great demanders of local supplies. For example, creating the capability for consortium between foreign players and local players, where the demand is local. For example, right now, Chile is working together with Brazil and other countries on green hydrogen, taking advantage of a comparative advantage, which is solar radiation or wind, and where the great demand for equipment is going to be in our countries. Why don't we do it? Chile is proactively making a connection with international consortiums to produce these components that are going to be required locally. For this, we need a more proactive government agreeing with demand and the suppliers, which are very important. So I think that there's a huge opportunity there. More of the same has not been sufficient for Chile, and how long it will take to close the gap, impossible to answer that question. Chile closed that gap in a stage that has to do with the initial gap, generating conditions for the private sector to, uh, and that resulted very well, but it reached a limit. It's been stopped for 20 years and we're growing instead of 4.5, we're growing 2.5 or 3%. So we need a second stage, a second set of public policy. And I think that the book by the World Bank is very illustrative on what things we can do in this second stage, realizing these technological particularities of what has already been done and how we can build on what has on the past. And also, long-term vision to the future is difficult as Latin American countries to have this vision like decarbonizing for 2050 and having other types of initiatives. I'm very optimistic here. We're achieving something, but history will set us in place. I just wanted to add two things in terms of artificial intelligence. 46% of the total capital invested in venture capital globally, which is around $131 billion in companies with AI. This range, this proportion is also being seen in Latin America and Caribbean. So how well we invest in companies that truly are not just transforming the way we consume, but they're actually transforming the production, means of production. So the remark on deep technologies and taking advantage of the full supply chain with the advantages that the region has as critical minerals and all of those elements. So I think that that medium and long-term vision, with vision and betting on innovation, is fundamental to be able to change that vicious circle. And on the question why Brazil achieved that momentum, of course, there is a scale where even companies founded in Argentina, such as Mercado Libre, ended up gaining market and showing a great to be a great company in Brazil because they have the scale. That's something that uh, intimidates the countries. If I could say something regarding the time it's going to take for us to achieve this, I think that it's not easy to forecast when it will happen, but it is important to keep in mind that South Korea was a much less wealthy country than we are in 1970. So it is possible to come together and organize for there to be much more growth. But it's necessary as a society to have this vision that we have to learn a lot more from outside. We have to use technologies that are available to increase the productivity of our countries. And the difference is key. It's not a matter of whether we are in poor sectors or not. I'll give an example before uh, leaving. Is the case of copper in Latin America and Asia and the US. Latin America was dominating the sector in 1980s, but they almost lost the industry in 1900 and they sold the industry to the foreigners. Japan was the second largest in terms of exports, and there are three copper companies that they know: Fujitsu, Hitachi, and Sumitomo, all of them with high technology. The question we have to ask ourselves as a region is, how is it that we have the same resources and we have such different results? And I maintain it's purely a matter of how we embrace the vision of reaching the technological frontier and bringing all those achievements to our countries. Thank you. And Don Jose, before you offer your comment, I also want to add, because there is a specific question for Mexico that I think you could help us with. What do we lack in Mexico for companies to be more successful and not just to have a few success cases in Guadalajara, Mexico, and Monterrey, but for it to expand to other cities? I think we've talked a lot about this already here. I think that there's a matter of uh, investment capital, regulatory frameworks, access to talent. I think something that's also in the report, we have very successful uh, alumni who end up working abroad, so we're not capable of retaining our talent. Irene was talking about the talent in AI. How can we make these people stay in Mexico and not go for a better salary abroad? So I think we need to dream more. We need to have that spirit of we can do it, and I'll uh, risk staying here with an enterprise instead of going someplace else. So I think it's the sum of several things. Some are maybe public policy, availability of investment and talent, but there's also this cultural aspect of saying we can do it and I will achieve it. And maybe that's more difficult to report as well. I understand two more questions. We have a few minutes because many questions came in, but we're being asked, what are the sectors to look at with greatest attention to strengthen these learning economies in Latin America? And what is the role that the countries or international cooperation between Latin America and the Caribbean could have to create more synergies between countries, thinking that Mexico could ally with Chile, Brazil, with Argentina, evidently. Regarding the first, I think that one way of seeing this, and I think that it's in the text as well, crises are always opportunities for our countries, for all countries, and Korea has not been the exception, Finland as well, and others, of rethinking the productive matrix, development strategy and how to do more and better of what was already done. Nowadays, the world is living a great crisis from the environmental aspect or point of view and climate change, and also regarding the topic of the use of technology. As Irene was mentioning, we are in the fourth industrial revolution, where this revolution or the AI is the first time that our neurons can be replaced. The first three were mainly our physical efforts that were being replaced. So, from the point of view of Latin America, I think we have enormous opportunities. First, in AI, and everything is ubiquitous. The access to enablers for AI. We know that they're very intensive in data centers. Data centers are very intensive in the future of green energy. Guess where the source of green energy is in the world? This is connected to the second topic of climate change. As countries, we suffer a lot from climate change, although we don't create the problem of climate change. But obviously, this struggle is going to go through a lot of natural resources, critical minerals, and others where Latin America has the opportunities. So, taking advantage of these opportunities, not because we need more copper, more lithium, but as Bill and others in the text were saying, how can we create knowledge, bring in knowledge from elsewhere, incorporate it, adapt it, as happened with copper, or as we will try to avoid with the copper, but doing it well this time and creating these productive chains, local capacity, entrepreneurship of scientific bases. In a different context than what now. So I'd say if you ask me, I'd go down that path, taking advantage of the situation of the world needs or emergencies, and all of these obviously based on algorithms, AI, that would help us, I think, to go for another half a century at least. Understood. Anyone else who wants to talk on these sectors that we will have in focus in the next decades? Yes, I would just add to what Bill said and now Jose Miguel. The combination is not just a sector. The combination of robotics, IoT, with AI, etc., this allows for a whole revolution and making several sectors more efficient. So, finding that combination of technologies, how they are applied in the local context with capabilities and the goals that the region has in sectors such as critical minerals, or, for example, having a relatively high availability of clean energies, which can be key for offering spaces of computing power so that companies such as NVIDIA can start producing their chips. So there's a whole combination of technologies that can be applied to different areas to see where Latin America and the Caribbean are competitive. And then we have high consumption sectors where there's still a great amount of population with poor service or very expensive service, ineffective service. So again, a classic where there's still great opportunity is financial because in spite of how mature this might be compared to others, we still have the uh, situation where you have countries in the region with less than half of the population with formal banking. This is going to come from a whole digital transformation of some of these companies or the onboarding of new actors, as has been the case of Brazil with Nubank. So I think that these are two examples of an area of more consumption and production, but they're places that we can be looking to where technologies can be combined in a way that can have great impact. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We are about to wrap up. We just have a little minute more to talk about this international cooperation in the region and to close for our other two panelists, Dr. Maloney, Jose, share on this, and we'll close up. I think in terms of international collaboration, we have to do more collaboration in general. We have many topics from organized crime to the growth that we have as countries working together more, but also maintaining, keeping in mind that we have to collaborate with the countries on the technological frontiers. We have to have a much greater turnover of students. And even within Latin America, we can see Guadalajara has engineers from everywhere, and Chile as well, with Startup Chile. They attracted people from all over the world. So becoming less inwardly focused and more open to the world and trade and ideas is key to advance the agenda. Yes, and on the topic of collaboration, I think that there is great collaboration in universities. Speaking of universities, but that collaboration generally doesn't have a sense of urgency. And I thought the way in which the universities responded to the COVID emergency with a great sense of urgency, with great speed, being most of the time very effective in this response. And I think we should look for in what way we can approach these topics with that sense of urgency. We have to put what we do out on the table, share our experiences within and without the region to be able to be prepared to address this type of emergencies that we are facing now. Well, thank you very much. First of all, to our expert panelists, thank you very much for sharing your time with us. It was gratifying to talk about all of this. And afterwards, thanks to all of our audience who followed us in Spanish, Portuguese, and English. We please invite you to download the report of the World Bank and at our page, elpaisforos.com. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll keep in touch. See you soon.